Yeah, we have the MCQs for today. The first MCQ is the initiation of visual impulse is associated with options are condensation of opsin with vitamin A, it's the photoisomerization and hydrolysis of visual purple, or it's a NADP, or it's a NAD. So I'll just repeat once again. The question is that it's an optional question, and the question is basically it's like an initiation of a visual impulse is associated with. I'll just repeat. It's the initiation of the visual impulse is associated with. It's the condensation of the opsin and vitamin A. It's the photoisomerization and the hydrolysis of visual purple. See, visual purple is basically it's a rhodopsin only, and it's the NADP or it's the NAD. So yeah, if you know the answer, it's good enough. But yeah, okay. So yeah, if you know, it's a. See, the answer is B, right? It's the photoisomerization and the hydrolyzation of the visual purple. See, visual purple, I told you, visual purple is basically the rhodopsin. So whenever light comes to your eye, the first thing there will be a hydrolysis of the visual purple, that is the photoisomerization and the hydrolysis of the rhodopsin in this case. So yeah, moving on to the next question. We have okay. So it's a very characteristic question, and it's basically a total diagnosis in this condition. So it's a 50-year-old known alcoholic male patient presented with fatigue, loss of energy, and dark colored urine. So he gives a history of blistering skin lesions on immediate exposure to sunlight, which healed with rust formation and scarring, and on examination hyperpigmentation and scarring were present on the face and dorsum of the foot. Basically, it's a very diagnostic feature which they have given here. See, that thing is, it's a blistering skin lesions on immediate exposure to the light. And it's a case of photosensitivity, and it heals with crust formation and scarring. So yeah, on examination there is one more thing, that is hyperpigmentation and scarring will be present on the face and the dorsum. And peripheral blood picture is the microcytic hypochromic anemia. Hemoglobin is also less, that is 7.4 only. And see, the main thing here it is, you have to remember, it's the dark colored urine. So in case of a dark colored urine with hemoglobin less, hemoglobin with hyperpigmentation and photosensitivity, only one diagnosis should come to your mind, and that is, anyone want to tell a diagnosis? Okay, diagnosis is very simple. It's the most common type of porphyria which we are talking about. It's the Porphyria cutanea tarda. So yeah, it's the most common porphyria, and it's due to the defect in the uroporphyrin decarboxylase, as we know. So yeah, we have the Porphyria cutanea tarda. So see, there are other options also which they have given. It's the acute intermittent porphyria, but it doesn't present with photosensitivity. So you have to remember, if it is photosensitivity, then it is the Porphyria cutanea tarda. And other options like hereditary corpoporphyria or is the variegata porphyria. Both are there, but in both condition it's a late age. But yeah, we have given the 50-year-old. So yeah, it's the early age in that. Sorry. So in late age it will be cutanea tarda porphyria. Next we move on. A 5-year-old child is brought to you with the complaints of noisy breathing. So it's a pediatric question. So he comes to you with a noisy breathing. On performing laryngoscopy, subglottis stenosis is noted. So which grading system will you use to report the extent of the stenosis? It's the Hyams grading, House-Blackman grading, Mayer-Cotton's, or is the modified Mallampati grading? Oh, it's a very easy, I think I know the answer, but yeah, I'll just repeat for the ones. It's a 5-year-old child who comes to you with the complaints of noisy breathing, and you perform a direct laryngoscopy, subglottis stenosis you see. So which grading system will you see to see the extent of the stenosis? Options are Hyams grading, House-Blackman, Mayer-Cotton, or is the modified Mallampati. So yeah, if you want to answer this for subglottis stenosis, which is the grading system? Okay, I will tell the answer. The answer is C, that is, it's the Mayer-Cotton grading system which we generally use for a subglottis stenosis. And see, modified Mallampati, it's for that only, but it's for anesthesia people. You use that for basically for intubation. You check before anesthesia, given the anesthesia only. So yeah, so it's subglottis stenosis is for Mayer-Cotton's grading. That you have to remember. So yeah, it's like grade 1, 2, 3, 4 from 50%, 50 to 70, 70 to 99, and no lumen can be detected. So yeah, see, Hyman's grading is for olfactory neuroblastoma. It's the House-Blackman's grading for the facial nerve, and modified, I told you, is for assessing the difficult airway, which is the modified Mallampati scoring. Okay, next we move on. It's a child. Yeah, it's a child who is brought by her parents to the OPD with compliance of crossed eye as shown below. They have given an image here which is it's a crossed eye. So by doing a simple torchlight test, you conclude that the child has a pseudo strabismus and the inner pupillary distance is normal. So which of the following can be associated with the child's condition? Options are negative angle kappa, hypertelorism, hypermetropia, or is the history of retinopathy of prematurity. So yeah, if you can just tell the answer here if you want. If you know the answer, you can just tell. I will just repeat once. It's a opthal question. It's a child who comes to the OPD with the complaints of crossed eye, and by doing a simple torch-like examination, you find that the child has pseudostrabismus and the interpupillary distance is normal. So which of the following can be associated in this condition? It's a negative angle kappa, hypertelorism, hypermetropia, or is the history of retinopathy of prematurity. So if you can just tell me the answer. Okay, this is a case of a pseudo-hysteropia, that is apparent convergence twin, which they are telling here. It is associated with a negative angle kappa and epicanthal folds. So yeah, it's a case of a apparent squint. So we have a pseudo-hystropia, pseudo-estropia also. But yeah, what we are talking about here is the pseudo-hystropia, that is the apparent convergent squint which we are talking, associated with a negative angle kappa and epicanthal folds. Next we have, it's a newspaper editor discloses the identity of a victim of rape without prior permission. So he would be tried under which of the following IPCs? If you can tell, it's 202, 228A, 269, or it's 270. So if you can just tell me the answer. Okay, it's a newspaper editor who discloses the identity of a victim of a rape without prior permission. So which IPC is that? 202, 228A, it's a 269, or it's a 270. So okay, the right answer is, what I got the right answer. The right answer is very simple, it's a 228A. So yeah, whenever a newspaper, what I was telling is, a newspaper editor discloses the identity of a victim, that to rape victim, so without the prior permission. So which of the following IPC would you tell the victim? So it's a 228A, which is the IPC for a rape victim, that to disclosing the name of the rape victim. So yeah, next we have in a chi-square test for following data degrees of freedom. Basically they have given some data, I cannot just tell you for that. So I'll just tell the next question. Next we have, yeah, it's a pediatric question. Now basically you are evaluating a baby in an ICU with a diffuse petechiae. So on examination, mites, hepatosplenomegaly, bilateral cataract, and a continuous murmur is there, suggesting of a patent ductus arteriosus. So which of the following investigation would you choose to diagnose the conditions, baby's condition? Is the RT-PCR of the CSF sample, blood spot test, is the IgM antibody in infant's blood, or is the IgG antibody in infant's blood? So if you can just tell me the answer. You have already diagnosed this patient, but I'll just repeat. Is the baby with the diffuse petechiae, mild hepatosplenomegaly, bilateral cataract, continuous murmur suggesting of a PDA, and which are the following investigations? Just remember diagnosis here, because without diagnosis you won't be able to tell this answer. So yeah, it's a very simple diagnosis. It's a congenital rubella syndrome. So in case of a congenital rubella syndrome, is the IgM antibody which we see in the infant blood. So yeah, we are talking about a case of a congenital rubella syndrome, and in case of a congenital rubella syndrome, what we find hepatomegaly and basically bilateral cataract will be present in the congenital rubella syndrome, as well as some murmur will also present, which goes towards PDA. But yeah, the question was which of the following investigation would you diagnose this condition, and the right answer was IgM antibody will find in the infant's blood. So yeah, antibody detection will be there. Next we have a patient has a solitary painless penile ulcer 2 months back. Now he presents with a generalized maculopapular rash over the body. So which is the sensitivity of VDRL at this stage of the disease? Is it 25%, 50%, 75 or 100%? Yeah, if you can just know the answer, you can just tell, but I know it's a difficult one. So I'll just repeat for the last time. It's basically they are asking for the which type of syphilis it is. Because see, it's a solitary painless. Whenever you have painless, that solitary penile ulcer 2 months back, that is a syphilis case, and he presents with a generalized maculopapular rash over the body. So what is the sensitivity of the VDR in this condition? So yeah, so if it was it's a case of a secondary syphilis. So the answer is 100%. So you have to remember like this. If it is a primary syphilis, it is 60 to 75%. Secondary we have 100%, and tertiary it is usually negative. So yeah. It's a VDRL test becomes positive 4 to 5 weeks after the exposure of T. pallidum, and 1 to 2 weeks after the appearance of cancer. So we know it's a VDRL, which is a highly sensitive test for detecting the syphilis. So if it's a primary syphilis, it's like a 60 to 70% sensitivity will be there, and if it is a secondary syphilis, 100% sensitivity to the VDRL will be there. So and tertiary it will be negative only. Next we move on. Which of the following esophageal carcinomas is most likely to develop in patient with a long-standing achilles-cardia? It's a very simple one. It's adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, small cell carcinoma, or it's a carcinoid tumor. So if you guys want to tell which is the most common carcinoma after a long-standing achilles-cardia. So anyone wants to answer this? Okay, it's a adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, small cell carcinoma, or it's a carcinoid tumor. So okay, the answer is very simple. The answer here is squamous cell carcinoma, which is the right answer here. So the squamous cell carcinoma, which is the most common carcinoma after, it's like a long-standing achilles-cardia. So it's the after long-standing achilles-cardia we have a squamous cell carcinoma add to an esophageal carcinoma. Next we have, it's above what level does the turbidity of water becomes visible to the naked eye? It's a 5 NTU, 6 NTU, 3 NTU, or it's a 4 NTU. Anyone wants to answer? Above what level does the turbidity of water becomes visible to the naked eye? 5, 6, 3, or 4? Okay, basically it's a very simple question. The question is, above what level does the turbidity of water becomes visible to the naked eye? It's a PSM question, but if you can remember, it's very easy. So its answer is 4 here. Is the 4 NTU, that is the, at that level only you can just tell that the turbidity of water becomes visible to the naked eye. And the ideal level of turbidity is less than 1 NTU for household drinking, but if you have more than 4 NTU, it will be a turbidity will be there in water. Next we have, it's a diagnostic peritoneal lavage. It's been done in a patient with a suspected hemoperitoneum. Which of the following statement is not true? I'll just repeat it. Which of the following statement is not true regarding a patient with a suspected hemoperitoneum? Options are presence of more than, that is a 1 lakh RBC per millimeter is a positive finding. Then we have presence of more than 200 WBC per millimeter cube is a positive finding. Then aspiration of at least 10 ml of gross blood is an indication of laparotomy. And the last one is the amylase level more than 175 units per DL is a positive finding. I know it's a very long question, but if you remember something, you just tell me which of the following is true regarding a suspected case of a hemoperitoneum. So the answer is very simple. It's B, right? The presence of more than 200 WBC cells per millimeter cube. It's a very much diagnostic criteria for a suspected hemoperitoneum. So it's a positive finding. You can just tell. So hemoperitoneum is basically it's a RBC in the peritoneum. So it's after a blunt trauma, which indicates if it is a 500 cells per millimeter cube in the diagnostic peritoneal lavage, you will tell as a presence of hemoperitoneum. Next we move on. What is the most common cause of a post-menopausal bleeding? So it's a very simple question. It's a senile endometrial atrophy, cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, or it's a atypical endometrial hyperplasia. So if you can just tell me the answer. Okay, I didn't thought this answer, but it's a very simple question. What is the most common cause of a post-menopausal bleeding? Is the senile endometrial atrophy, cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, or it's a atypical endometrial hyperplasia? If you can just tell me the answer here. It's a postmenopausal bleeding all over the world. So what is the most common cause of postmenopausal bleeding all over the world? It's a senile endometrial atrophy, cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, or it's a atypical endometrial hyperplasia. So okay, I'll just tell the answer here. The answer is very simple only. It's A, that is we thought of cancer, but no, it's not cancer. It's basically A, that is a senile endometrial atrophy is the most common cause of a post-menopausal bleeding. So all over the world, because in menopausal women, hypoestrogenism causes atrophy, and because of that atrophy, she can have bleeding will be there. But yeah, cervical cancer is the most common cause of postmenopausal bleeding in India. If you tell about India, it is the cervical cancer, and if you tell about the all over the world, it is the senile endometrial atrophy. So yeah, you have to remember that. If it's in India, it's cervical cancer, which is the most common cause of postmenopausal bleeding. So yeah, next we have, it's a pathological question. So yeah, identify the cell in the given peripheral smear blood and the likely diagnosis. I know, basically I will just tell you what is the cell here. You can just do a diagnosis if you want. So yeah, it's a acanthocyte. Yeah, there is the answer. Only that is the only answer. But here is the acanthocytes or the spur cells which are seen in the anemia of liver disease. So here you have to remember, if there is a anemia of liver disease, is the acanthocytes which will be seen in the pathological peripheral smear, basically blood smear. So yeah, these cells are characterized by only a few spicules of varying size that are projected from the cell surface at irregular intervals. So yeah, basically it's the acanthocytes which is seen in the case of anemia of the liver disease. Next we move on. Which of the following is not a definitive criteria to diagnose a PID? PID, you know, is the pelvic inflammatory disease. So which is not a definitive criteria, they are just asking you. Is the histopathological evidence of endometritis. Second one we have is the tubo-ovarian abscess on sonography. Then we have a temperature greater than 38.3 degrees Celsius, or is the laparoscopic abnormalities consistent with PID. So yeah, which is not a definitive criteria they are asking. I'll just repeat, is the histopathological evidence of endometritis, tubo-ovarian abscess on sonography, is the temperature greater than 38.3 degrees Celsius, or is the laparoscopic abnormalities consistent with PID. So yeah, if you can just tell me the answer. You can just write it's a okay. I will tell the answer. The answer is C. See, temperature greater than 38.3 degrees Celsius is not a definitive criteria. It's an additional criteria basically. Because if you have fever, that doesn't mean that it will be a case of a PID. So yeah, so it doesn't. If you have fever, that doesn't mean it's a case of a PID. And the criteria for PID, as I told, it's first was the histopathological evidence should be there. Laparoscopic evidence also can be there. And yeah, tubo-ovarian abscess on sonography is also a definitive criteria, but not temperature. Temperature is an additional criteria basically. So yeah, and minimum criteria, you know, it's cervical motion tenderness, adductor tenderness, and low abdominal tenderness. So in case of a PID. So next we move on. Next we have a case that a patient comes to you with the following finding. Basically it's a pitting edema, and which of the following can cause this condition? Is the options are elevated vascular hydrostatic pressure, it's a reduced vascular hydrostatic pressure, is the elevated plasma osmotic pressure, or is the reduced plasma osmotic pressure. So yeah, if you know the mechanism of pitting edema, you can just tell it's basically it's a multiple choice question. I'll just repeat, it's elevated vascular hydrostatic pressure, reduced vascular hydrostatic pressure, elevated plasma osmotic pressure, or is the reduced plasma osmotic pressure. So yeah, if you know the answer, you can just tell the mechanism of pitting edema, basically they are asking here. So yeah, okay, the answer basically is they are asking the mechanism of a pitting edema, and you know in pitting edema there will be elevated vascular hydrostatic pressure as well as there will be reduced plasma osmotic pressure. So you have to remember this both things for a mechanism of a pitting edema, that is there will be reduced osmotic pressure and increase in hydrostatic pressure. So yeah, 1 and 4 is the right answer here. Next we move on. Which of the following organism causes hard black nodules over the scalp hair? It's a term question if you know. Which of the following organism causes a hard black nodules over the scalp hair? It's a Pidia hortae, it's a Trichosporum belgi, it's a Cornybacterium tenuis, or it's a Cryptophyton tonosans. So yeah, if you can just tell me the answer here. So which of the following organism causes a hard black nodules over scalp hair? It's a Pidia hortae, Trichosporum belgi, Cornybacterium tenuis, or is it Cryptophyton tonosans? So yeah. Okay, the answer is here is A, that is a Pidia hortae is the right answer. Basically in case of a Pidia hortae, it's a hard black nodules which can be seen over the scalp. So it's a fungal infection of the hair shafts caused by Pidia hortae. So you have to remember it's a Pidia hortae, that is the black hard nodules. And treatment is shaving or cutting hair, and benzoic acid ointment you can just give. So yeah. Next we have next question. A patient says that he feels that there is something wrong with him mentally and it is because of the summer season. So how much would he score on the insight scale? It's a 2, 3, 4 or 5. So yeah, I will just repeat. It's a patient who comes to you with that, and patient who comes to you and tells that there is something wrong with him mentally and it is because of the summer season. So how much would you score on the insight scale? Options are 2, 3, 4 or 5. So yeah, if you can just, it's a psychiatric question, if you can just tell me the answer. So yeah, basically it's a scoring system they have given. It's an insight. If you have an insight scoring system, it's 3 in this case. So yeah, the 3 is as he is aware of being sick but has attributed to the external factors. So yeah, so there is an insight scoring system. I'll just tell you, it's from 1 to 5. So 1 is insight is complete denial of illness, that is 1. Second, slightly awareness is there. So yeah, there is a slight awareness that there is something wrong with me. It's the second one. And then we have a third is awareness of being sick but attributed to the external factors. Then we had an intellectual insight, and the last one emotional insight which we have. So yeah, so what we are discussing is case 3. Intellectual is awareness of being ill and the symptoms are due to the own particular irrational feelings and thoughts, and emotional is the highest level of insight in this condition. And yeah, so next we move on. The question is, what is the most common site for spondylolithiasis? It's a L2, L3, L4, L5, L5S1 or it's a L3, L4. So yeah, anyone wants to answer this? What is the most common site for spondylolithiasis? That is lithiasis. It's a L2, L3, L4, L5, L5S1 or it's a L3, L4. So yeah, it's the anterior displacement of one segment of the spine upon another. So it is caused as the result of spondylitis. So yeah, it's a spondylolysis and refers to a defect of stress fracture in pars interarticularis of the vertebral arc. The most common site is L5. So yeah, L5 is for spondylitis, but yeah, if it is spondylolithiasis, it's the anterior displacement of the segment of the spine upon another. So it is in the L5S1, you have to remember that. Okay, a 40-year-old female underwent total thyroidectomy, and on the third post-operative date, the patient complains of numbness in her fingers and perioral area. So which of the following vessels would have been injured during the surgery? I'll just repeat once. It's a 40-year-old female who underwent total thyroidectomy, and on the third post-operative day, the patient complains of numbness in her fingers and perioral area. So which of the following vessels would have been injured during the surgery? It's the anterior branch of superior thyroid artery, posterior branch, superior branch of inferior thyroid artery, or the inferior branch of inferior thyroid artery. So yeah, here they are the most common nerve artery injury in case of a total thyroidectomy. So yeah, what I know is the answer is it's a superior branch of the inferior thyroid artery, which is it's a above clear scenario is suggestive of a hyperparathyroidism due to injury of the superior branch of inferior thyroid artery. So you know what are they? But yeah, so yeah, the answer is it's a very simple. We are asking the most common nerve which is injured during thyroidectomy is superior branch of inferior thyroid artery. And they also complains of the numbness in the fingers and the perioral area. So numbness is because of the hyperparathyroidism and due to the injury of the superior branch of inferior thyroid artery. Next we move on. A patient comes to the OPD with a skin rash for 3 days. He gives history of anti-epileptic drug uses for 2 months and is attached on examination. So I'll just repeat, it's a patient who comes to you with a skin rash, that too for only 3 days, and he gives history of anti-epileptic drug uses for 2 months and is attached on examination. Basically, the patient is diagnosed here with the Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and which of the following are implicated in this adverse effects? Basically, they are asking which is the drug which can cause Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Options are phenobarbital, lamotrigine, topiramate, or it's a ethosuximide. So you can just tell which of the following drug can cause Stevens-Johnson syndrome. It's phenobarbital, lamotrigine, topiramate, or is it ethosuximide? So yeah, anyone wants to answer this? Okay, the answer is it's a B is the right answer. Lamotrigine, basically it has an adverse effect of causing Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and adverse effects as it is there. I will tell that's the other adverse effects is the skin rashes, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, dizziness, diplopia, sedation, ataxia, headache. So yeah, it's a lamotrigine, which you use anti-epileptic drug, as you know. Next we move on. It's we have a patient whose barium swallow they have given here. So barium swallow of a patient presented with dysphagia is given below. So what is the most likely diagnosis? So I'll just tell you what is the barium enema, barium meal they have given. So I'll just tell you it's a cork screw appearance. So just tell me if there is a cork screw appearance in case of a barium meal. That is a barium meal. What is the condition? So it's a very much peculiar feature. So a patient is okay. I'll just repeat. It's a patient who comes here with the dysphagia and you do a barium meal and you find a cork screw appearance. So what are the diagnosis? Options are diffuse esophageal spasm, esophageal carcinoma, esophageal diverticula, and it's a Achalasia cardia. So I'll just tell the answer. You have to remember it's a very peculiar finding. It's a esophageal spasm. So whenever you have a diffuse esophageal spasm, you will see a cork screw appearance of the esophagus. So on barium swallow, DES may appear as a cork screw or a rosary bead esophagus, but this is uncommon. And the manometry is a gold standard diagnosis for this condition. Next we move on. I think last 3 questions we have. The drug most frequently used for intravenous regional anesthesia is it's a lidocaine, bupivacaine, mepivacaine, or it's a procaine. So it's also a very simple question if you know. The drug most frequently used for intravenous regional anesthesia. It's a lidocaine, bupivacaine, mepivacaine, or it's a procaine. So if you can know. Regional means local also, you can just think about that. But it's basically simple. It's the most common intravenous regional anesthesia is lidocaine. We use for anywhere. So is the lidocaine is the right answer for the intravenous regional anesthesia. Next we move on. A middle-aged man comes to you with a liver metastasis with an altered LFT and he's posted for a surgery. So what would be the opioid of choice for him? It's also an anesthesia question only. Options are fentanyl, alfentanil, it's a sufentanil, or it's a remifentanil. So if you can just answer this, it's a middle-aged man with liver metastasis with altered LFT. So what is the anesthesia of choice for this condition? It's fentanyl, alfentanil, sufentanil, or it's a remifentanil. So if you can just answer this. These are all factual questions. You have to remember this. You have no choice for there is no concept here. So basically we have to find a drug. We have to find an anesthetic here, which doesn't go to liver only, because see liver is not good here because of liver metastasis. LFT also not, it is altered. So you have to take an anesthetic that is basically which doesn't go to liver only. So the right answer is remifentanil, because remifentanil is independent of the liver metabolism. So in case of that is liver metastasis, you can give remifentanil in these cases. So it's hydrolyzed by the plasma and tissue esterases, and hence its metabolism is independent of the hepatic function. Next you have is the preferred drug for a patient with chronic symptomatic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction is a bosentan, sacubitril, or valsartan. It's a omeprazole, or it's a monocytinidine. So I also don't know the answer here, but just tell me what is the preferred drug for a patient with a chronic symptomatic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. It's bosentan, it's a sacubitril or valsartan, it's a omeprazole, or it's a monocytinidine. So if you can just guess also, you can just A, B, C, D. Anyone wants to answer? Anyone means what? Okay. It's okay. We use here it's an angiotensin receptor and neprilysin inhibitor, that is ARNI, is used in patient with chronic symptomatic to reduce the morbidity and mortality. So I also don't know, but the answer is B, that is a sacubitril or valsartan, that is ARNI, which I told it's an angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor, which we use in case of a chronic symptomatic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So it's a combination, and it's a prodrug. It inhibits the enzyme neprilysin, which is responsible for degradation of ATL and BNP. So next we have is the last question for today. Which of the following arteries is the most commonly involved in patient with coronary artery disease? I'll repeat. Which of the following arteries is most commonly involved in patient with coronary artery disease? Is the right coronary artery, left anterior descending coronary artery, left circumflex coronary artery, or the left main coronary artery? So if you can just tell. Okay, I'll just tell the answer is the most commonly involved artery in the coronary artery disease is left anterior descending coronary artery. So yeah, so you have to remember that there is no choice, it's a pathway question. So yeah, thank you so much for joining, and yeah, bye.